Big time fight added to our card coming up this weekend, and hey, one of us is dressed a little bit differently. One of us decided to put on the same clothes from yesterday, but we were all done previewing Overeem and Volkov. We put the video out today, and then of course, Devonte Smith ends up with a late replacement fight, and he's taking on the guitar hero, Justin Jaynes. And Matt, Justin Jaynes is one of those guys that win or lose, he's always going to hold a place in my heart for that crazy knockout win that he had on short notice against Frank Camacho. And he has a really good opportunity in this fight to earn a finish like that from Devonte Smith. We've seen that happen before. I mean, his last fight out, he was taking on Kama Worthy. It was on relative short notice. Both guys had trained together in the past. They were buddy-buddy. It was almost reminiscent of when Yancy Medeiros fought Cowboy Cerrone. Like, we're playing it cool. We're playing a little bit of tummy sticks here. And then all of a sudden, Kama Worthy goes full Death Star and knocks out Devonte Smith. And then after the fight, Devonte Smith ends up in a compromising position where he has a terrible Achilles injury, and we haven't seen him in a very long time. To be specific, it's been about a year and a half since Devonte Smith has entered the octagon. This is not Devonta Smith or Devonte Smith from college football. So let's make that clear. He has not won a Heisman Trophy. He's taken on Justin Jaynes, and listen, Jaynes is that classic fighter that you're going to have coming out of Xtreme Couture. And really, I compare all of these guys and gals to a certain extent because there's a lot of wrestlers that have become boxers. They're wrestle boxers. And really, fighters like that have found a ton of success. I mean, Dan Igue's really made a big mark. You saw Brad Tavares just a couple of weeks ago put on a really good showing against Antonio and Carlos Jr.
Stipe's the greatest heavyweight ever.
Stipe Miocic, and he fights somewhat like that. But if you look at Justin Jaynes in particular, the thing that really weirds me out about this fight, and I think it's absolutely insane, is the fact that the strike differential between these guys from positive for Devonte Smith to negative for Justin Jaynes is about 6 per minute. You have Devonte Smith over 3, you have Justin Jaynes at a -3, and we've seen Justin Jaynes absorb a lot of strikes, not so much in the Camacho fight, but in the Gavin Tucker fight and against Gabriel Benitez. Benitez pretty much had his way with that one.
I don't want to say we called that fight almost to a T, but we kind of did, so we should probably pat ourselves in the back a little bit. Jaynes against Benitez, just stylistically, that wasn't a great matchup for him. And it is interesting because you might think Devonte Smith is a much better fighter than Benitez is. But he's an easier matchup for Jaynes than Benitez ever was, because for Devonte Smith, he will stand and somewhat brawl with Justin Jaynes. And for Jaynes, that was the issue with Benitez. He was using his footwork. He was really able to evade a lot of the big looping shots of Jaynes, force him to really follow Benitez. And then when Benitez decided to stand his ground and really finally throw a strike, he kneed basically through his body. It was one of the more disgusting knees to the body you'll ever see. But Justin Jaynes won't have that problem in this fight. I don't really see Devonte Smith using his footwork in a similar way that Benitez was able to. He's definitely going to use his footwork in this fight because for Devonte Smith, you're coming off a super long layoff. It's been almost 2 years since you've won your last fight. And just mentally, like, that must be really hard for a fighter if it's been that long off your last win. Yes, it's been a little bit recent since he's been in there last against Kama Worthy. But 2 years to go without really achieving the only goal you have in this sport is just an insane mental hurdle that he will have to overcome. And it's something that I always kind of go back and forth between with Devonte Smith. I think of what my opinion was of him right before that Kama Worthy fight. To me, Devonte Smith was on his way to becoming a top 15 guy. At one of those 10 to 15, if not one day, could make a run and go a little bit higher. The Kama Worthy loss was so bad, and I love the comparison that you brought up between the Yancy Medeiros and Cowboy fight, because Yancy and Cowboy, they were just kind of high-fiving each other. It didn't feel like a fight as much as it felt like a spar, and that was exactly what Kama Worthy and Devonte Smith were really doing until Worthy landed that big shot. So for me, it's, how good is Devonte Smith's chin? Could anyone drop him with a clean shot? Or was that he was kind of relaxed? He wasn't really expecting the big shot back. And the other thing you have to think about, too, with the Kama Worthy fight, those guys were longtime training partners heading into that. So maybe Devonte Smith knew the version of Kama Worthy that did fight at 145, the more fragile version, thought he was going to go in there and run over him. And, of course, that didn't happen. So I'm just really curious about the mental state of Devonte Smith coming into this fight, coming off a long injury, and, of course, losing in that weird fashion his last time in.
And if you look at Devonte Smith's record, he had a great win streak coming into the UFC and all finishes. I mean, beat DeMonte Robinson first round triangle choke, beats Nick Gertz by stoppage due to strikes. He beats Justin Edwards first round finish, Joseph Lowry first round finish, Julian Rosa, Juicy J in the UFC. What was that, his 4th time with the UFC? Beat him by first round finish, beat Dun Hyun Ma, the Maestro, by first round finish in a performance of the night where Ma only landed one leg kick to all of the strikes that Smith had landed. One leg kick, that was it. Smith put on a great performance in that one. He was supposed to take on John McDessie. He was supposed to take on Clay Collard. He gets Kama Worthy. And listen, John McDessie, to me in my mind's eye, again, because my mind works in mysterious ways sometimes, John McDessie is like kind of the gatekeeper to maybe a 20 to 15 type of guy. Like John McDessie's been around with the UFC for 20 years. He's from the Maritimes. He's been in Montreal for a long time, but he's a guy that a lot of people know what you're going to get out of him. You're going to get a fight of the night performance against Ross Pearson, or you're going to get put on a poster by Lando Venata. And so you could have had John McDessie, kick heavy offense. Then you have Clay Collard. What's Clay Collard good at?
Got them hands.
Well, he's a boxer. And then you get Kama Worthy that's kind of a mixture of both. He's really rangy, and again, they train together. So that was a really weird one for me. The other one on his record, and I get it, we're 4 years removed from the time he fought John Gunther. Do you remember John Gunther from The Ultimate Fighter?
He was bad.
He wasn't great. So he got finished there, and then we go through the record. He was finishing guys left, right, and center. Every win is a finish for Devonte Smith. He has 9 by knockout and 1 by submission, and the guy definitely has power in his hands.
Oh, yeah.
The one thing I worry about in this fight, and I'm a weird guy when it comes to injuries as well, because I might put too much emphasis where I shouldn't, and vice versa. I might be, fast and loose with somebody's injuries and just assume that they're going to be at 100%. But an Achilles injury like that, I'm sure, or I hope, he's healed up quite well. But the one thing I worry about is if you're a striker that can rely on your movement, and you're taking on Justin Jaynes that has a good wrestling base, that could be an opportunity for Justin Jaynes to catch Devonte Smith flat-footed, make him worry about the wrestling, hit him with a power shot, or the threat of the takedown's always there. The only good thing for Devonte Smith so far is that in the Camacho fight, in the fight against Gavin Tucker, and the last one against a really tough out in Gabriel Benitez, Justin Jaynes has 0 takedowns given or really landed so far in the UFC. He has decent takedown defense. I believe it's 50% at this point. For Devonte Smith, 100%. But again, he's only fought parts of, 4 rounds in the UFC. So he really hasn't spent a lot of time in the octagon. Small sample size. But again, Justin Jaynes, really good wrestler. We haven't even seen it in the UFC yet.
And, okay, that's what makes me worry about his wrestling a little bit. If you're a really good wrestler, you are going to use it. And it's turning into one of those. It's not at this level yet, of course. Justin Gaethje's a great wrestler. Justin Gaethje's a great wrestler. The only time I've ever seen him grapple ever is Khabib took him down immediately and there was no resistance at all. And I understand different levels, we're dealing with different kinds of fighters, but we haven't seen any offensive wrestling out of Justin Jaynes, and it just makes me worry as to when we're going to see it from him, or if he's ever going to really implement that style into his game plan, because we do see a lot of wrestlers. Johnny Hendricks is probably the most famous example, is I'm a wrestler, I can mix things up with my boxing and with my takedowns, and then I fall in love with my hands. And I'm not saying Justin Jaynes has fallen in love with his hands, but we haven't seen the wrestling in the UFC yet. So I don't know if this is the fight that we will see some of the wrestling from Justin Jaynes. I think this is a great start if he decides that he's going to start using it. But Devonte Smith's coming out here. He's had a full training camp. He was expecting to fight a guy in Alex da Silva who stylistically isn't all that similar to Justin Jaynes, but still a guy who can do quite a bit. So you're not really preparing for a specialist as much as you're just preparing for another well-rounded martial artist. So I think Devonte Smith will be well equipped for this fight. I do like him, but again, I would have really liked to see this fight if Justin Jaynes was coming in with a full training camp, because I do think stylistically this is a really fun fight. This could produce a fight of the night, and I think we're probably going to get a finish no matter who ends up winning.
You talk about Devonte Smith and you look at his opponent that he was supposed to be taking on originally in Alex da Silva, and I remember going back and watching his fight against Alexandre Yakovlev, and Michael Bisping was singing the praises of Alex da Silva like this guy was going to be the next champ. I couldn't believe how high Bisping was on him. I didn't really see anything super special. The record was great, and he's really young, but a lot of finishes on the regional scene. You never know what you're really going to get. He loses the fight to Yakovlev by finish. He beats Kazula Vargas. Cool story, bro. And then he loses to Brad Riddell in a fight that wasn't overly close to the end of the year. Having said all of that, Alex da Silva is decently well-rounded. I mean, he can grapple fairly well. He has a little bit of power in his hands. His clinch work isn't all that great. His wrestling isn't all that great. I would have expected Smith against da Silva to implement a very boxing-heavy type of game plan. Against Justin Jaynes, for sure, that's going to be the same idea. You're still going to strike with him because Justin Jaynes, from what we've seen so far, can get outstruck for sure. Tucker did it, even though he got rocked and wobbled at one point, and you saw it from Gabriel Benitez with those crazy kicks from that rangy southpaw stance. So for me, this is a really tough one to try and gauge down the middle. I want to see what the odds are going to be because, again, this fight was just kind of put together in the last 3 or 4 hours before we had the chance to really talk about it. So I'll weigh where the odds are at. I like Jaynes as an underdog coming in here on 5 days' notice if he will wrestle. But again, I'm going to hold my pick and really wait. And I'll be firm on it closer to the end of the week with Fight Night Picks question mark kicks. So for now, I'm going to go with what looks like the overwhelming underdog if you go by the limited sample size Tapology votes that we have. 113, 89% going with Smith, and 82% with him to win by knockout. Again, if Jaynes goes in there, goes bread and butter to wrestle, he could very well get a win over Devonte Smith. Smith has great hands and a ton of power. So again, not the most confident pick. And if I switch this pick on question mark kick on Saturday, I wouldn't even be surprising myself.
No, listen, I've got Devonte Smith. I think he is going to win this fight. It's hard to beat Devonte Smith on a full training camp unless you are a childhood friend of his. For Justin Jaynes, this can be tough on a week's notice. You are going to be fighting a guy who has good cardio, even though he is a power puncher. Devonte Smith, not a guy who will slow down near the end of a fight. If you do look, he's got a TKO in the 4th round. He is a guy who can carry his power late. I understand a lot of his finishes come earlier on in the fight. But even though he is one of the more those bigger, heavily muscle body types, he's not someone who I'm worried about getting tired in this. If Justin Jaynes wrestles, again, it's such a big if for me. I doubt we're going to see that version of him. I think Jaynes will go out there and primarily box with Devonte Smith. And Devonte Smith on his game, the much more rangier striker out of the two. So I just think he'll be able to really use some of his longer range attacks, be able to eventually catch him with a big straight.
Matt, I'm going with Justin Jaynes. I don't have faith in the cardio. I don't have faith in the injury return, but we'll have to see what happens. You're going with Devonte Smith. It should be a great card, and we already have the videos out for the entire Overeem and Volkov card. Looking like there's a little bit of a shuffle there with the Andre Ewell-Cody Stamen fight. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, because we'll have updates all week with this one. And as we always say, let's get into it.